within the Muldos mountain range, one that laid at the northernmost region of the continent. Although the desert where Max was born in was also part of the north, its climate and environment could not be any more different from the Muldos mountain range. Everywhere he went, a blizzard would be present. Moreover, howling winds constantly besieged the area, and the sky was constantly dark. From what he could tell, there were no living creatures within the mountain range. The only living beings present were ancient trees that were swaying in the strong blizzard wind. All of the trees were covered with a thick layer of snow. The Muldos mountain range. It was known to the residents living in the vicinity as the anti-life zone. Max had entered during the summer, and yet, its surroundings were as cold as winter in any other region, and its temperature was constantly below -10 degrees Celsius. Once winter arrived, its temperature would plummet to below -100 degrees Celsius. At that point, the water vapor that one exhaled would instantly freeze. With winters and summers this cold, it was no surprise that the region was plagued by an eternal blizzard. At this moment, a wolf's roar came from the depths of the snow mountain. A snow wolf. It was one of the rare few creatures that lived within the Muldos mountain range. With a furry white coat that enabled them to resist the sheer cold of the mountain region, these wolves were able to calmly hunt and track their prey in spite of the frigid temperatures. Those who lived around the Muldos mountain range had a deep-seated fear of these fearsome creatures. Not only did they possess great offensive prowess, they were fast, and they also hunted in packs. Their fangs were razor-sharp, and their claws were capable of shattering hard rocks. In a sense, they were the overlords of the snowy lands, as most creatures within the region were considered to be their prey. However, should any researchers be present at the moment, they would undoubtedly tremble with curiosity. After all, the roar that Max had just heard did not sound like a threat or a warning. Rather, it carried the undoubtable stench of fear. Not far from where the snow wolves were, stood a hulking figure that was slowly approaching them. That huge figure was like a small hill, and it was completely unimpeded by the thick layer of snow covering the ground. Not only did the figure look huge, it was extremely heavy as well. Every step it took would cause the earth to tremble. It would also leave behind a huge footprint within the snow. At the same time, countless heaps of white snow would be flung into the air. At this moment, over a dozen of snow wolves were glaring down at the figure within the blizzard as if they were going against their greatest nemesis. The fur on their bodies were standing on end, and it made them look as if they were frightened cats. Those who were not as strong-willed as their allies had already begun to flee, and their limbs were trembling throughout the entire process. Thump! 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 The huge figure was still pressing on towards them. That thick pressure it exerted was suffocating. The leader of the snow wolves felt as though it was sitting on pins and needles. The terrifying pressure quaked its soul to its core, but it refused to escape. It knew that once its formation was broken, the other creatures hidden within the snow would definitely pounce at them. At long last, the terrifying enemy that they had encountered had finally revealed its face. It was a red dragon. Their enemy was Max. After spending a full 3 months flying at his top speed, Max had finally crossed the desert and arrived at the far north of the continent. The 3 months that had gone by had made Max even more powerful. Not only was his body bigger and sturdier, but he was also much stronger than before. His attributes had also received a massive boost from the impure dragonkin that he had devoured. True name, Max Agatha Hill Alexander. Race, Red Dragon, Lawful Evil. Current dragon rank, Dragon Hatchling. Age, 1. Maximum lifespan, 12,000, Ancient Dragon. Attack, 100, Normal Red Dragon Hatchling 15. Spell Strength, 600, Normal Red Dragon Hatchling 25. Defense, 50, Normal Red Dragon Hatchling 10. Speed, 50, Normal Red Dragon Hatchling 13. Magic, Invincible Golden Body Plus, Lightning Arrow Rain, Thunderstorm, Lightning Paralysis, Thunderclap, Light Affinity, Lightning Immunity, Thunderous Divine Retribution, 10 million volts of thunder. Abilities, Bite, Claw Strike, Stomp, Tail Swipe. Breath, Lightning, Strong Acid. Remarks, you have already amassed enough strength that most dragons would take decades to accumulate. You still don't consider yourself a freak. Max's personal attributes were displayed on the system interface. However, Max did not care about this. Right now, Max's priority was locating the dark snow lotus crystal to treat Mia. Even with the system's guidance, it had still taken Max 3 whole months just to reach the Moldos mountain range. At the same time, Max was also slightly frustrated at the little red dot that was blinking in the system's map. Since the system's map did not support unlimited magnification, Max could only roughly know that the snow lotus was in the middle of the mountain range. The mountain was sealed in by a heavy blizzard, and thus it was a no-man's land. At the same time, the area it encompassed was even larger than the desert that Max had grown up in. Under such circumstances, it would be very difficult for a newcomer like Max to locate the lotus crystal quickly. He thought to himself, I wonder, will these snow wolves be able to provide me the location of the lotus? Roar! Max attempted to ask, but immediately after, the dozen or so snow wolves trembled and ran with their tails tucked between their legs. They ran desperately and frantically, and it was much to Max's surprise. Am I that scary? I only wanted to ask for directions. Max shook his head helplessly. All he could do was to push forward and search deeper into the Moldos mountain range. Not long after Max left, a sleigh passed through the area where Max previously was. The sleigh was pulled by 3 big dogs. A middle-aged man in a thick coat held an oil lamp and looked at the ground. What's this? The middle-aged man raised the oil lamp to get a clearer look. However, upon realizing what it was, he gasped in terror. A hint of panic flashed through his eyes. It was a huge footprint, bigger than his sleigh. What kind of monster has appeared? The middle-aged man trembled with fear. After taking a quick whiff of his cigar to calm his nerves, he then hastily drove his sleigh away from the scene. It was plateau in the previous chapter, but the word used here is mountain range.
Hey everyone, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy the audiobooks, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support us further, consider becoming a Patreon member. As a member, you'll gain the ability to request the next part of a novel audiobook I've uploaded, depending on your Patreon tier.
Boar Village. It was one of the villages closest to the Moldos mountain range. There were hundreds of residents living within the village. They had lived there since ancient times, and they made a living by selling the specialties that came from the snow mountains. Without a doubt, the Cockadors were the most famous family within the village, as they hailed from the bloodline of the 3 great heroes of one. Although none of the members of the Cockadors clan held any positions within Boar Village, they still possessed great influence and respect. Even the village chief had to bow down to the whims of the clan. After all, everyone within the Cockadors clan were monstrously strong. Even a child who had just passed his 5th birthday possessed strength that no other adult in the village could compare to. They could easily lift a few hundred kilograms of stones and easily hold back the wild boars that had barged into the village. It was rumored that the Cockadors hailed from giants, and as a result, it had bestowed them with great strength. At this moment, many villagers of the older generation had gathered in the village chief's home. It was not due to any emergency, but rather, it was for the sake of tradition. It was the summer solstice. It was the warmest time of the year. It was for this reason they had gathered to discuss the future of the village. Although the Moldos mountain range was extremely cold, to the villagers of Boar Village, it was also a stable source of income. There were all kinds of treasures waiting to be discovered within the mountain range, after all. For example, the snow mountain grass and highland flowers that were located within the mountain range could fetch a good price within most cities. Boar Village was not the only village that had this tradition. All the villages around the Moldos mountain range would gather together on this day and discuss what resources they would focus on collecting in the following year. At this moment, the old village chief was looking respectfully at the middle-aged man sitting on the village chief's seat. Unsurprisingly, the middle-aged man was from the Cockadors clan. The middle-aged man was sitting in the village chief's spot. However, no one questioned it. Rather, to them, it seemed like it was the natural place for him to sit at. After all, such was the status owned by the Cockadoors clan. Even if they were to head to any other village, they would still receive the same level of treatment. The village chief was just about to speak when suddenly, the sound of hasty footsteps came from the door. Immediately after, the village chief's door sounded. The knocking was extremely hurried. Everyone's attention was drawn to this sound, especially the old village chief, whose brows were tightly furrowed. Everyone who should be present are already present. Logically speaking, no one else should approach us at this time. Could it be some mischievous kid stirring up trouble? However, the middle-aged man from the Cockadoors family was expressionless. His eyes were tightly shut. It was as if he did not hear anything. The knocking of the door was still ringing out. The old village chief impatiently walked over and opened the door. "Father. Something big has happened." The person who interrupted the meeting was none other than the old village chief's son, Malmo. "Don't you know that we're having a meeting? I've already told you, have I not? Unless something major has occurred, you are absolutely forbidden from disturbing our meeting." The old village chief glared coldly at his son and chided. Malmo nodded, obviously understanding the old village chief's words. "I was patrolling outside the village earlier, when I ran into the footprints of a snow monster." Upon hearing those words, laughter immediately broke out within the village chief's house. "Snow monster? Malmo, are you still a child? Even my grandson doesn't believe in the existence of monsters. Are you drunk?" Murmurs of derision and mockery arose as the old village chief frowned and questioned Malmo. "Son, didn't I explicitly forbade you from drinking when you're on patrol?" The middle-aged man from the Cockadoors clan opened his eyes at this moment. He raised his head and glanced at Malmo as if he had thought about something. Malmo frowned. "It seems that father is doubting my words. Everyone, the footprint is not far from our village. If you don't believe me, then come with me to take a look." The moment Malmo's voice subsided, the old village chief immediately gave Malmo a slap. "Son, we are discussing important matters right now. We don't have time to entertain your drunk illusions." Malmo received a slap for no reason, and his entire face was red with embarrassment. He was already over 40 years old, and he was even the father of 2 children. He was a man of dignity, and yet, the old village chief had slapped him in front of half of the village. "Father." Malmo's voice shook. "I'm not drunk and I'm not lying." Thinking that Malmo was still fooling around in front of him, the village chief was on the brink of exploding with anger. He was just about to teach his 40-year-old son a lesson when suddenly, the middle-aged man from the Cockadoors clan stood up. The man glanced at the anxious Malmo, and said indifferently while stretching his back, "He isn't lying. Village chief, you can rest assured." Upon hearing the man's words, the village chief was instantly convinced. "Since Mr. Aussie has said so, then I will believe you this time." The old village chief snorted and walked to Malmo's side. "What are you waiting for? Take us to see the footprints of your so-called monster." Malmo frowned and clenched his fists. "Okay. In that case, follow me." After grabbing the oil lamp on his sleigh, Malmo then sped off into the night. The middle-aged man named Aussie from the Cockadoors family followed closely behind. He did not even put on a coat. The old village chief and the other elders behind him looked at each other. They did not know what to say. They quickly put on their coats, picked up their own oil lamps and quickly went after them. It was late at night, and the sky was frighteningly dark. The wind howled, and the heavy snow that struck their faces stung. The group had been walking for about 20 minutes when suddenly, Aussie stopped. He stared at an empty space not far ahead. Due to the constant blizzard, it was impossible for anyone else to see what was ahead. What a powerful aura! Malmo stopped and turned around to say to the group behind him, "It's right there. Take a look." It is unknown whether the author is referring to Tahir and gang, or a different group of individuals. At this moment, there were more than a dozen villagers surrounding the empty space. Snow was falling, and the air was freezing. The cold wind constantly stung the villagers' faces. Once Malmo had finished speaking, everyone slowly walked forward. Then they came across a giant footprint. The footprint was nearly a meter wide. Even though there was a thick layer of snow covering it, it was still an attention-grabbing sight. Moreover, the aura left behind by the footprint caused them to feel extremely shocked. Everyone inhaled a breath of cold air. Just where on earth did this thing come from? What creature does this footprint belong to? How can it be this huge? One of the villagers exclaimed. Could it be from the snow wolves? Someone made a guess. Malmo glanced at the villager who made this guess with disdain, and explained slowly. Even if the snow wolf is an anomaly, it would only be 2 meters tall at most. This is just a footprint, and it's already 1 meter long. How could it be from a snow wolf? Everyone nodded after hearing Malmo's explanation. Such a huge footprint was definitely not left by a snow wolf. In that case, what could it be? The footprints contained claw-like marks. It was definitely not from a creature like an elephant, or a hoofed creature like boars. Those with claws were either birds, reptiles, or tigers. At this moment Aussie, who had been silent the whole time, touched his beard and slowly walked forward. What do you plan on doing, Mr. Aussie? Don't talk, you'll disturb Mr. Aussie's thought process. Aussie squatted down. He touched the snow on the ground with his finger, and placed it before his nose. It's not a frost mountain saber-tooth, nor is it a butterfly lizard. Following this, Aussie then placed the snow into his mouth and chewed on it slightly. He was silent. The villagers surrounded Aussie and looked at him nervously. They dared not breathe loudly, for fear of disturbing Aussie's thoughts. He suddenly opened his eyes, and shock flashed in his eyes. Do you know what it is, Mr. Aussie? The old village chief hurriedly inquired upon noticing Aussie's reaction. Aussie looked around at the villagers and spoke in an indifferent manner. It is a dragon. Moreover, it is not a sub-dragon. It is a pure-born dragon. Aussie's words resonated like thunder within everyone's mind. The old village chief gulped down a mouthful of saliva. His eyes were filled with disbelief. He opened his mouth with great difficulty and spoke slowly. Mr. Aussie, you mean to say that the owner of this footprint is not a snow monster, but a genuine dragon? Aussie nodded. He did not attempt to correct the old village chief's words. The village chief voiced out the puzzlement in the villagers' hearts. They could not believe that a dragon had appeared around their village. One had to know that their ancestors had lived in the Moldos mountain range for hundreds of years. Despite that, they had not once heard of dragons roaming about their region. A terrifying calamity that raised everything appeared within the villagers' minds. Everyone felt as though they were being suffocated by the image of the dragon in their minds. Malmo's eyes were also filled with disbelief. After all, dragons stood at the top of the food chain throughout the entire continent. Even a newborn dragon could easily kill countless adults. Once dragons matured, they would become even more terrifying. They could wantonly enter human cities and snatch everything they wanted, be it treasures, food, or even humans. As long as there was something they wanted, no one would be able to stop them. It was said that a few months ago, the old king had specially formed an army of 100,000 soldiers to fight against the ancient dragon Agatha that resided in the desert north of Longsong Alley. Not only did he send 3 powerful platinum-rank humans to lead the charge, but he had also brought countless dragon-vanquishing ballistae. Even so, the 100,000-strong army was completely wiped out by the dragon. There were even rumors that the ancient dragon Agatha did not appear. Just Agatha's 2 children alone had wiped out an entire 100,000-strong army. Although no one believed this rumor, the sudden appearance of the dragon had reminded them of the rumor once more. Dragons were existences that humans could not defeat. Even if humans sacrificed countless amounts of blood, it would only serve to irritate the dragons. In the end, they could not deal lasting damage on them. Moreover, dragons generally like treasures. There were no treasures in the Muldos mountain range. Their number of people living within the region were few and far between. How could there be any treasures? No, what if there were gold and silver mines in the mountain range? This would explain everything. Upon this thought, Malmo instantly became excited. What if my guess is true? He quickly said to Aussie, Mr. Aussie, it is rumored that dragons are extremely fond of treasures. You said that these footprints belong to a dragon. In that case, does it mean that there are gold mines within our vicinity? Aussie nodded slightly. What you said is very possible. The dragon would not appear for no reason. There must be a reason for this. However, this is just a minor issue. More importantly, the appearance of a dragon would undoubtedly bring about death. Hurry up and prepare the village's defenses. Be careful of the sudden appearance of the dragon. It will have an irreversible impact on the village. The old village chief nodded. He immediately looked at the other elderly villagers behind him. They were the elders in Boar Village. Most of the matters in Boar Village were decided by them. Let's go back and quickly store food and other necessities. Unless there's an urgent matter, do not let anyone head out. Should the dragon appear, have the elderly and children escape into the cellar immediately. I almost forgot, Malmo. The old village chief turned his head and said to Malmo. Inform the lord about the appearance of the dragon in Boar Village and request them to send over some guards. Malmo looked at the old village chief. Although his father had insulted him earlier, he was not so petty that he would lose sight of the important matters to be done. Malmo nodded and ran toward the village chief's house without looking back. After all, his sleigh was still parked there. Max continued to move forward in the snowstorm. Heavy snow rained down and paved Max's path forward. His surroundings were a vast expanse of whiteness. Other than the sky, everything was white. Max shook the snow that had piled up on his wings. He had already been at the Muldos mountain range for 2 whole days, but aside from the human settlements that he had spotted around the mountains, he had not found anything else. Max was in no hurry, however. After all, as an ancient dragon, he could easily live to the ripe old age of 12,000 years old. 2 or 3 days was but a blink of an eye in the face of his long lifespan. Moreover, as a dragon, even a slumber that lasted for several months was considered to be a short nap for him. The map had only given a general area, in which Max was supposed to conduct his search in. However, with the heavy blizzard that robbed one's sense of direction impeding him, Max had found it difficult, frustratingly so, to locate the dark snow lotus crystal that was supposed to treat his sister. Without his sense of direction gone, Max could not even determine whether he was going in circles or not. Another 2 to 3 hours passed. Max peered forward, only to frown slightly. He had located his own footprints. From the looks of it, it had not been too long since he was in the area. With a flap of his powerful wings, Max was launched into the air. From his lofty position in the sky, the snowstorm that plagued the region looked even more pronounced. Max looked into the distance. There was a village there. Within the darkness of the snowstorm, the village that was surrounded by lights looked eye-catching. It reminded Max of the stars in the night sky. Without a second thought, Max then flew in the direction of the village. The village was not particularly far from Max. It was only a few kilometers away. For some reason, Max had not discovered this village prior to this. The only reason he had spotted it now was due to the lights that had illuminated the village. In less than half a minute, Max had appeared directly above the village. Max's huge figure slowly landed in the middle of the village. Countless villagers spotted Max's huge figure landing, and wetted their pants out of fear. Their legs went soft as they collapsed to the ground. With terror flashing across their eyes, they shouted, "A dragon! It's really a dragon! Run! A dragon has arrived to eat us!" Many people chose to escape. While they fled, they made sure to alert their fellow villagers of the dragon's existence. However, the ruckus had upset Max. Powerful jolts of electricity churned within his mouth. Following this, Max lifted his head toward the sky and unleashed a powerful ray of lightning into the sky. Crockum! A frightening beam of electricity that was 3 meters thick bore through the clouds. The sheer power contained within the beam unleashed a powerful shockwave within a 300-meter radius. Many of the tiles on the houses fell off in an instant, and several cracks had formed on the walls of the houses within the blast radius. Due to Max's powerful blast, the dark clouds that had gathered in the sky were instantly blown away. The originally gloomy sky instantly became clear. The glow of the moon had finally penetrated the atmosphere and illuminated the ground. This was a skill that Max had obtained from devouring the terrifyingly powerful Dragonkin, the lightning beam. Although its magnitude per spell strength was nowhere close to thunderous divine retribution, it did not require much spell strength to achieve a great deal of damage. Between the two skills, Max preferred lightning beam more, as he considered his spell strength too low to make full use of thunderous lightning retribution. Max's frightening attack had momentarily stunned the villagers. They turned their heads to look at the red dragon in shock. Fear ran deep within their eyes. Through Max's display of power, they immediately understood that if Max had so desired it, they would have already been dead. No, they would be worse than dead, they would be disintegrated until not even their ashes remained. Realizing that the villagers had finally calmed down, Max slowly opened his mouth to speak with the villagers around him. "Bring me the person in charge of your village. I want to meet them." Max's words had once again shocked the surrounding villagers. They had never met a dragon before. Living in the edge of the continent had kept them isolated from the rest of the world most of the time, and thus, the only info they had regarding the dragons had come from the rumors of the rare travelers that had wandered into their village. Thus, the fact that the dragon, Max, was capable of speaking the human tongue had given them a huge fright. You can speak human tongue." A villager mustered up his courage and asked Max. Max did not intend to waste his breath on these people. He glared coldly at the villager. The villager felt Max's intense glare and instantly shuddered. Although he was wearing thick clothes, but he felt as if he was not wearing anything. The frigidness of Max's glare had seeped through his skin and chilled him right in his bones. He felt as if he was locked in an ice cellar, and Max had become the executioner who decided whether he would live or die. He was certain that it would take a mere instant for the red dragon to kill him. Frightened by Max's gaze, the villager hurriedly shut his mouth. The surrounding people were also silent in fear. They dared not speak a single word. "You have a minute to bring the leader of this village to me. Once that minute passes, you shall experience a dragon's wrath firsthand." Max looked around at the villagers and said threateningly. Upon hearing Max's words, the villagers trembled. They were just a small village. How could they bear the fury of such a huge dragon? An image of Boar village burning immediately appeared within their minds. In less than half a minute, the old village chief had arrived before Max. The old village chief had just returned with Aussie, and he was panting. He hurriedly ran to Max, and after taking a deep breath, he finally spoke. "Respected Mr. Dragon, may I ask why you have graced Boar village with your presence? Is there anything that you need us to do?" Max glanced at the village chief and demanded. "Give me food, water, and any information you have about this object." Max raised his eyebrows. Following this, a holographic projection appeared before everyone's eyes. It was a crystal like lotus blooming in the icy world. It was the target of Max's trip, the dark snow lotus crystal. A doubt flashed across the eyes of the village chief when he saw this extremely beautiful snow lotus. Aussie's pupils immediately shrunk upon this sight. Okay. Max's noticed the slight change in Aussie's expression. He immediately turned to ask Aussie. "Do you know something?" Aussie snorted coldly. "All I know is that the object you're seeking is related to the mysterious beings living within the mountains. I know nothing else beyond that." Max frowned. "Have I angered you somehow?" Aussie turned his face to the side. Interesting, very interesting. Max laughed coldly. The lightning in his mouth suddenly bloomed and instantly killed the old village chief in front of him. There was nothing left of the chief. All that was left was a burnt piece of land. Not a single scrap of the village chief's clothes remained. Those who dare to be impudent against me shall suffer my wrath. Max glared coldly at Aussie. I will spare your life for now. From this moment onwards, you are the chief of this village. Should I ever find out that you're hiding something from me, I will slaughter every single one of the villagers within this village. Aussie frowned. As a member of the Cockador's family, they had been instilled with the idea of slaying dragons since they were young. He was certain that Max was not yet an adult. From his rough estimates, Max could not be older than 10 years old. This is clearly a dragon hatchling. But how can a mere dragon hatchling possibly cast such a powerful spell? One had to know that back when Aussie was young, he had followed his family out for training, and had hunted down many young dragons. However, none of the dragons he encountered were as powerful as Max. It was no exaggeration to say that Max was as powerful as an ordinary adult dragon. Had Aussie possessed his weapon in his hand, he would have already launched himself at Max. At this distance, Aussie was confident that he could stab Max's heart before Max could even react. Naturally, ordinary words were useless against Max's hard dragon scales. However, in the Cockador's family, there was a huge sword that was made completely out of dragon bones. Aussie was certain that the sword would pierce Max's defenses and instantly kill him once it had struck Max's heart. However, it was a pity that Aussie had not kept this sword with him at all times. After all, it was a treasure passed down in the Cockador's family. Even his own cousin, one of the 3 heroes, was not qualified to take it away. Aussie was born with a sense of disgust towards dragons. Aussie was unfazed by the village chief's death. He shrugged and said indifferently to Max. Indeed, I did not lie to you, but I do hate you, dragon. Because of your appearance, our desolate boar village will plunge into a sea of blood. Max frowned. This man is propping himself up. Where does his confidence come from? Were all passers-by this arrogant these days? Although Max wanted nothing more than to kill the man before him, he still managed to suppress the violent urges within him. Mia's health takes precedence. He's my only lead at the moment, I can't afford to lose him right now. Searching for a month or 2 was perfectly fine for Max. However, he could not afford to spend years on this search effort. Tell me the location of the mysterious creatures you just mentioned. Mar looked at the trembling villagers who were carrying out food and water and said to Aussie. All I know is that it would appear around one of the 7 peaks of Moldos on the night of a full moon. Max narrowed his eyes and subconsciously looked at the sky. It's a full moon. It's today. Max swallowed the food and water in a single gulp. Following this, he then shot into the distance. Human, should I discover that you are lying, I will make sure to raze this village to the ground. As Max's figure faded into the distance, a crafty look flashed in Max's eyes. Naturally, he knew what that mysterious creature was. Since ancient times, there had been several rumors of snow monsters appearing within the Moldos mountain range. However, only the Cockador's clan knew of the creature's true identity. After all, the blood of the 3 heroes flowed within their bodies. The mysterious creatures were actually one of the dragons, the silver dragons. What about the fact that there were no dragons in the Moldos mountains? Was that a lie? Indeed it was. The entire continent was shrouded in the shadow of the dragons. How could there be no dragons in the vast Moldos mountain range? The incomparably cold world of ice and snow was the favorite habitat of the silver dragons who adored cold environments. However, the silver dragons did not hate humans. On the contrary, they admired humans very much. On the other hand, the silver dragons and the red dragons were not on good terms. Once the 2 met, they would start fighting like mortal enemies. Generally speaking, battles between red dragons and the silver dragons would not stop until one of them had died. It would be a brutal fight. From what Aussie knew, there were 3 silver dragons who were over 1,000 years old within the Moldos mountain range. Although he did not know what rank the 3 silver dragons were at, he was certain that they could easily handle the red dragon that looked no older than 10. Moreover, according to Aussie's observation, the red dragon Max was extremely unaccustomed to the world of ice and snow. It was likely that it would greatly weaken his fighting strength. Being in their home ground, Aussie was certain that the silver dragon's strength would be vastly amplified. As a result of this, Aussie was certain that the gap between the red and silver dragons was extremely large. Upon this thought, a smile appeared on the corner of Aussie's mouth. "Little dragon, so what if I lied to you? Would you even be able to return alive?" In the eyes of the silver dragons, the red dragons, which were on the side of evil, were considered as the scourge of the world and an existence that must be eliminated. Aussie looked at the scorched ground and rubbed his shoes against it. The village chief's death was by no means a good thing. Should Malmo return and learn of his father's death, he would probably lose his mind. Aussie returned to the old village chief's room, picked up a cup of coffee on the table, and slowly took a sip. At this moment, Aussie slowly closed his eyes and enjoyed the taste of the coffee. Bitter but delicious. He was already envisioning the scene of Max's tragic death, at the hands of the silver dragons. Malmo drove his sleigh and sped through the snow. The Duke's manor he was heading to was 10 kilometers away from Boar village. No matter how fast the sleigh dogs ran, it would still take them at least half an hour to reach the Duke's residence. It was currently night time. Other than the oil lamp at the front of the sleigh providing Malmo with light, his surroundings were entirely pitch black. The wind was howling, and along with its powerful gales, it carried a frigid cold, stinging Malmo's face as he sped onward. He could not help but bring up his coat's collar. The road was gloomy, and wolf howls could be heard from time to time. Whenever Malmo heard those howls, he shuddered. He knew very well what creature the sound had come from. They were from snow wolves, the most terrifying creatures within Malmo's memories. Although the snow wolves by themselves did not possess much combat strength, it would still take 5 to 6 adults just to bring it down, and more often than not, a few casualties would ensue. However, the snow wolves were social creatures. They hunted in a pack, and usually their pack was at least 10, but more often than not, 20 wolves strong. This number was more than enough to kill a mere villager from Boar village traveling alone. Oh wait, there's an exception to this. The Cockadors. Malmo thought to himself. After all, the Cockadors clan possessed the bloodline of one of the 3 heroes. With the strength they possessed, they could easily face off against the snow wolves without even wielding a weapon. Aussie was usually lazy and not easy to get along with. However, Malmo knew that if he were to get serious, his combat strength would be through the roof. Malmo had once seen the scene of Aussie single-handedly killing 3 snow wolves alone. Upon striking down the pack leader, the other wolves immediately retreated. The scene had caused Malmo, who was hiding in the distance, to be extremely shocked. Malmo sincerely believed that Aussie was as strong as the 3 heroes. With such an existence watching over the village, no threat would be able to harm the village, right? Naturally, the dragons were another matter. Malmo reckoned that even with his full gear equipped, Aussie would still be defeated by dragons. Boar village was clueless to the outside world. Although they knew that humans had once gone against the dragons, they were certain that they had paid a terrible price for each dragon they defeated. What Boar village did not know, however, was that the dragon vanquishing ballistay had already been invented. Malmo swung the whip in his hand to spur the sleigh dogs to run faster. Since the dragon might appear in Boar village at any time, he needed to make every second count. Moreover, the howls of the surrounding wolves were starting to get close. Malmo was certain that the snow wolves were already in his vicinity. Should he ever enter their sights, he was certain that he would perish without even putting up a fight. Once this scene came to mind, Malmo felt a chill run down his spine. His entire body trembled. He carefully looked at the darkness around him. He was on the lookout for any snow wolves. The tense atmosphere lasted for about 20 minutes. Fortunately, there were no accidents along the way. Malmo safely arrived near the lord of the region's manor. From afar, Malmo had already spotted the outline of the mansion. It was majestic. It was a 4-story building that was 200 to 300 meters tall. To him, it was like a castle. Around the building was an incomparably spacious courtyard, with many sculptures and flowers within it. One had to remember that this was the Moldos mountain range. It was a land of freezing temperatures, and thus, the state of the Lord's courtyard had seemed like a paradise to Malmo. The temperature within the courtyard seemed to be regulated. Malmo did not know what kind of magic was used to achieve this, but he was certain that it had been a huge expenditure. Outside the courtyard, a huge iron fence blocked Malmo. Malmo quickly drove his sleigh to the main gate. There was a group of guards guarding the main gate, and the defense was very tight. Malmo looked at these fully armed soldiers and subconsciously gulped down a mouthful of saliva. The weapons on their bodies all gave off a faint sense of danger. Malmo was no mage, but he guessed that the weapons in the hands of these soldiers were magic weapons. After informing the guards of the purpose of his visit, Malmo was immediately brought past the main gate. However, he was not free. The two soldiers each pointed a long spear with complicated patterns engraved at Malmo as they approached the residence. As soon as they entered the garden, Malmo felt a wave of heat rushing toward him. The temperature around him also changed from -10 degrees Celsius to more than 10 degrees Celsius. Malmo immediately felt his back drenching in sweat. He quickly took off his thick coat. The two guards behind him did not care. After all, they were well aware of the difference between the temperature inside and outside. From their point of view, Malmo's actions were extremely normal. They could sympathize with him. After all, they too had acted similarly when they first entered the residence. The Duke's room was on the highest floor of the residence. It was currently late at night. As an ordinary commoner, Malmo should not have the right to disturb the Duke's sleep. However, the Duke was not like the lords of other regions. The owner of the residence, Magfred Bellagroya, was a kind lord. Not once had he ever increased the taxes of the village under his governance. Moreover, he would oftentimes provide gifts to the various villages under his rule. In Magfred's eyes, they were living in the most desolate region in the continent. Thus, there was no need for them to drag anyone down. He decided that he would spread warmth instead, so that everyone could live better in their already cruel world. Magfred did not put on any airs as a lord. He was not like some bad-tempered lords who would order his soldiers to chop down someone's head on a whim. Therefore, although Magfred's manor was very luxurious, none of his residents felt envious or jealous. They even thought that Duke Magfred had deserved it for the compassion and benevolence he showed. After stepping on the 4th floor's steps, the guard asked Malmo to wait at the door. "Come in." The voice of a middle-aged man in his 40s or 50s came from the door. It was not until Magfred's voice came from the door that the guards pushed the door open. Magfred's door slowly opened and Malmo saw Magfred's figure. Magfred was a slightly chubby middle-aged man in his 40s or 50s. He looked like he had taken good care of himself, and his hair did not show any signs of graying. However, perhaps due to fatigue, the wrinkles on his face were rather pronounced. Magfred, who was wearing a nightgown, was still sleepy. He seemed to have just been woken up by the guards, and was still not fully awake. After taking a glance at Malmo, who was in a sorry state, Magfred stretched his head forward and observed Malmo even more carefully. "Oh, I know you. Are you the son of the village chief of Bor village, or the son of the village chief of Gravka village?" Magfred asked. "I am from Bor village. Grandminka is my father." Malmo hurriedly introduced himself. Grandminka was Malmo's father, the chief of Bor village. Magfred nodded and asked in puzzlement. "In that case, why are you here in the middle of the night instead of spending the joyous summer solstice with your father? Could it be that you're here to invite me to spend the summer solstice together with Bor village?" Malmo hurriedly shook his head. Even though Magfred was benevolent and treated Bor village very well, he would likely fly into a rage should he learn that his slumber was disturbed over the trivial matter of celebrating the summer solstice together. After all, Magford was a duke, not a saint. Duke Magford. Malmo hurriedly told Magford everything he knew about the dragon threat. Initially, Magford had a sleepy and blank expression. However, as Malmo's tale progressed, he started to frown, and he began to take on a dark expression. A dragon appeared in the Muldos mountain range. How could this news not shock Magford? One had to know that Magford had hailed from the Belagroya family. The family had guarded the territory of the Muldos mountain range for decades, and despite the perpetual conflict that the continent was in, the Belagroya family had never given up on their territory. Magford quickly headed to his study room. It was a library of knowledge that had been passed down, had the family tree that the Belagloria family had passed down for generations. Magford wanted to confirm what kind of existence dragons were. Magford was a well-read individual. He had a basic understanding of the ferocious beasts that dominated the land and sky. What he was hoping to confirm, however, was the purity of the dragon within their region. Should the dragon be impure, he was confident that he could find a way to deal with it. However, should the dragon be pureborn, it would be beyond his means to deal with it. After about half an hour of reading, Magford Belagroya's eyebrows furrowed. As expected, his immediate ancestors had never encountered dragons before. However, a number of the former lords, who were Magford's ancestors, had seen the mysterious snow monsters living in the Muldos mountain range. The snow monsters had different figures. Some looked like humans, but they were 3 to 4 meters tall. Some were in the shape of ferocious beasts. What attracted Magford's attention the most was a message from Zeppelin Belagroya from 300 years ago. It was stated that someone had spotted a snow monster in the shape of a dragon within the Muldos mountain range. However, beyond that, the message did not contain anything else. Most likely, Zeppelin had chalked it up to the villager imagining it, and thus, he did not spend any time investigating it. Magford looked at Malmo. It could be seen that he was in a very bad mood, so he said to his maid, "Inform the guards to form a 10-man team to escort Malmo back to Boar village. After escorting Malmo, have them stationed near Boar village and investigate its surroundings. Should they spot any traces of a dragon, they should immediately return and inform me." Soon, 10 well-equipped guards appeared in front of Magford at the maid's notice. They were all wearing thick silver armor, which was the best cover for them in the snow. They stood in a line before Magford, and they each carried grim expressions on their faces. After all, they had heard from the maid that there were traces of a dragon near Boar village. Boar village was not far from the Lord's manor. Thus, if the dragon so desired, it could quickly arrive at the Lord's residence after attacking Boar village. Of course, this was under the premise that the information provided by Malmo was true. If the information Malmo provided was false, and he had deliberately lied to them, no matter how good Magford's temper was, the guards under him were not to be trifled with. "Remember, if you do encounter a dragon, do not fight it," Magford said solemnly. He knew how terrifying a dragon was. It had tyrannical strength, was almost invulnerable to knives and spears, and had a talent for magic that many had yearned for. Leveling a city was piece of cake to these fearsome creatures. The guards nodded very seriously and gave a military salute to Magford. "Duke, we will definitely complete the mission perfectly." Magford nodded. At this moment, Malmo had already left the room, and was waiting for Magford's news downstairs. "Attention, I have one last thing to tell you. Should a dragon appear and threaten Boar village, you are allowed to abandon Boar village should you deem fit." Magfo hesitated for a moment before finally speaking out the decision in his heart. After giving up on Boar village, immediately head to the other villages and assist them in taking refuge. The strength we possess is insignificant against a dragon. Should it actually lay harm to Boar village, we can only offer up Boar village as a sacrifice, in hopes that the safety of the other villages would be spared. Upon hearing those words, one of the guards hurriedly stated, "Duke Magford, perhaps we have other ways." "Lord Magford, Perhaps we have another way. One of the guards hurriedly said after hearing Magford's orders. What other way? Do tell me, Grange. Magford hurriedly asked Grange. A large part of the reason for why Magford was beloved by many was due to how down-to-earth he was when interacting with the common folk. Even though Grange was an ordinary guard, Magford still knew his name. Grange paused for a moment before responding. Duke Magford, you may not know this, but there is indeed a family with a mystical bloodline in Boar Village. They are born with incomparably powerful strength. Legend has it that one of the 3 heroes who had perished in the desert had hailed from this family. Magford nodded slightly when he heard this. He knew not of this. Even his father had never mentioned this to him. Is this true? Should such a powerful family exist within Boar Village, they would certainly possess enough strength to protect the villagers there, even if they ultimately proved to be no match for the dragon. With this thought in mind, Magford's expression became a little better. After all, he was not willing to give up on the villagers of Boar Village. After all, they were hundreds of lives within the village. When he thought of the hundreds of lives that would be lost if he gave up on them, including many children who had just been born, Magford's heart began to ache. In that case, tell me the name of that powerful family and help me contact them. Magford quickly made his decision. The first thing he needed to do was to contact the other party. They are the Cockador's family. Grange quickly said. Magford nodded. Very good. After you escort Malmo back to Boar Village, immediately contact the Cockador's family for me, and tell them I have need for their power. Grange was slightly hesitant. After all, he knew that the Cockadors were very proud. He did not know whether it was because of the clan or the bloodline, but they were born to feel superior to others. He did not know whether or not they would reject Magford's invitation. What's wrong? Magford asked upon noticing Grange's expression. Nothing. It's just that, my lord, the Cockadors are naturally arrogant. I'm afraid that me rashly heading over to them would only annoy them. Grange said. Magford frowned slightly. You should still attempt to make contact with them. If they aren't willing to help us, then I'll personally go and meet them. Grange's pupils constricted, and he hurriedly said to Magford, Absolutely not, my lord. You know exactly how dangerous Boar Village is right now. If you go there personally, you might face great danger. Magford shook his head and said fearlessly. It's okay. I'm still a gold rank adventurer. Don't underestimate me. Grange looked as if he wanted to say something else, but in the end he held back his tongue. Following this, he then left Magford's side together with the other guards. Malmo, who was downstairs, spotted the 10 guards leaving the room. Malmo, I've sent 10 well-equipped guards to escort you back to Boar Village. They will follow the villagers of Boar Village, and look for the traces of the dragon together. However, at this moment, the earth suddenly shook. Rumble. At this moment, the ground of the Duke's mansion began to crack uncontrollably. What's going on? An earthquake. Impossible, there has never been an earthquake in the Moldos Mountains. What the hell is going on? Countless servants and guards in the Duke's residence were discussing animatedly. In the corridor, Duke Magford almost stumbled and fell to the ground. He quickly grabbed the railing at the side and stabilized himself. What happened? Magford asked in shock. He was certain that this was no simple earthquake. The Belagroya residents had been strengthened through a special method, and they had even used magic tools. No ordinary magic would be able to break through his manor's defenses. The ground in the center of the residence was cracking. This meant that the defensive measures in his residence were completely ineffective. While everyone was panicking, a terrifying dragon's roar came from afar. It was in the direction of Boar Village. Malmo heard the dragon's roar coming from Boar Village, and his eyes went red. He was incomparably agitated, and he directly ignored everything and rushed in the direction of Boar Village. Something must have happened in Boar Village. There's a high chance that the dragon has already made its way into Boar village. Magford frowned. The dragon roar confirmed everything Malmo had said. He no longer hesitated and immediately ordered his guards. What are you waiting for? Apart from leaving behind a small team to deliver a letter to the king, the other guards will all set off. But my lord, who will protect your manor? One of the guards asked in confusion. Magford cursed in his heart and said, Tom, do you think that I'd just stay here and wait for my demise? Of course I will go with you. Everyone was shocked by Magford's words. The Duke will be accompanying us. Get the maids and cooks to run as far as possible. Until I give the order, or until the king's reinforcements have arrived, they are not to come out of hiding. Do you hear me? Magford ordered. Understood. Everyone immediately replied. While everyone in the Duke's residence was preparing to set out, a beam of light suddenly pierced the skies. It was a terrifying beam of electricity that tore through the clouds. Because of the beam, the dark clouds that had gathered in the sky were instantly shattered. The originally gloomy sky instantly became clear. At long last, moonlight was finally visible from the ground. It was the lightning beam that Max had released. One guessed the identity of the three heroes has been confirmed now. After hearing the terrifying dragon roar that came in the direction of Boar village, Malmo immediately rushed back without a care in the world. As he ran, he put on his heavy coat. Even though the guards at the entrance of the courtyard had tried to stop him, they were unable to slow down Malmo's movements in the slightest. As soon as he left the courtyard, the frigid air blew towards him like blades once more. Despite this, Malmo immediately ran to his sleigh and untied the ropes that were chaining his sleigh. The sleigh dogs were also frightened by the terrifying dragon roar. Malmo quickly patted the heads of the sled dogs to calm them down. After all, it would take at least 2 hours to reach Boar village by foot. However, it would only take half an hour by sleigh. At the moment, the sleigh and the dogs were extremely important to Malmo. Malmo stroked the chin of the sleigh dogs and attempted to placate them. Although Malmo was in no mood to do these things, he had to do it. However, just as the dogs were beginning to calm down, a beam of electricity suddenly appeared. Its terrifying power made all living beings within a 10-kilometer radius tremble. Whoa! The sled dogs that had just recovered were shaken by this terrifying lightning beam, and they immediately huddled in a corner to keep warm. No matter what Malmo said, they were unwilling to come out again. As for Malmo, he was also frightened by this terrifying light beam, and it had caused his heartbeat to slow down by half a beat. Malmo hurriedly gulped down a mouthful of saliva to calm himself down. Damn it! Malmo cursed loudly. He did not know what had happened in Boar village, and it made him extremely anxious. However, the sleigh dogs were so terrified by the beam of electricity that they were unable to move. Without the help of the sleigh dogs, he would be unable to operate his sleigh. After all, it was not a magical sleigh. Malmo was an ordinary person. He did not have any talent in magic, and he was already in his 40s. It was impossible for him to start picking up magic. However, Malmo's combat ability was still considered good among ordinary people. After all, he could kill a rampaging wild boar from the Moldos Mountains all by himself. Despite this, combat ability had nothing to do with speed. Even though Malmo was capable of defeating wild boars, he was unable to make it back to Boar village by foot within half an hour. Damn it! I'm done for. Malmo's legs went weak as he crumpled onto the ground. He raised his right fist high and then smashed it fiercely onto the ground. There was a hard stone contained within the snow. As a result, blood began to flow out of Malmo's hand. How interesting, Malmo. While Malmo was disheartened, a familiar voice suddenly sounded from behind him. Then, a series of horse hooves followed. Malmo suddenly turned his head around. Lord Magford was riding a warhorse, and had brought hundreds of fully armed guards to his front. Malmo, what would you do once you've returned? You're just an ordinary person. With your strength, can you save any of the villagers from the dragon? You don't have Herculean strength, nor do you possess any magic. Of course, I believe that you have a brave and fearless heart. However, what good would a stout heart do against a fearsome dragon? Magford asked. For some reason, Lord Magford admired Malmo's attitude. He reminded him of his past. I can't do anything, nor can I change anything. Malmo gritted his teeth. But my wife and my children are still in Boar Village. When I think of the dragon wreaking havoc in Boar Village, my heart feels as if it has been cut open by a knife. I am indeed insignificant, but even if I were to die in vain, I will definitely not regret it. Malmo shouted loudly. Malmo's voice echoed within the land of ice and snow. Ha 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 ha. Magford laughed heartily. Very interesting, Malmo, you really are a hopeless fool. You clearly know that you'll die, but that does not impede you in the slightest. Beside Magford, a guard commented. My lord, you really admire this kid. Ha 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 indeed. After all, I was just as reckless as him back when I was young. How about this, Zima, give this kid a warhorse and let him come to Boar Village with us. Magford said to the soldier beside him. Yes, my lord. The soldier brought over a warhorse and handed it to Magford. I'll leave warhorse named Yorsons to you. Take good care of it. The soldier said to Malmo. Malmo was extremely excited. This was truly a timely assistance. Malmo hurriedly stood up and bowed deeply at Magford. Lord Magford, I, Malmo, will never forget your great kindness. Should you ever require my assistance, I will not refuse. Magford waved his hand. If you can spare time to talk, you might as well hop onto the horse and follow us. With that, Magford rode straight for Boar Village. Malmo nodded and glanced at the warhorse, Yorsons, before hopping on top of it. He touched the smooth mane on Yorsons' back, and a cold glint flashed in his eyes. It's time to return to Boar Village. With that, Malmo rode on Yorsons and dashed into the distance. Yorsons was faster, way faster than the sleigh, and Malmo was certain that he would reach Boar Village in no time. The army moved at lightning speed. A team of several hundred guards advanced rapidly in the biting cold. No one spoke a word during their travel. They were all silent. They had already increased their speed to the absolute limit, but still, they did not have much expectations for the state of Boar Village. After all, they were facing off against a dragon, a creature of myths. A casual spell could easily destroy their village. Boulders, projectiles, and even razor-sharp weapons were useless against dragons, as their scales had made them impervious to most objects. To most, dragons were a symbol of invincibility. They were also the symbol of fear. Many of the guards' hearts were pounding. They had no idea what kind of fierce battle awaited them. Even though there were hundreds of them, none of them were sure that they would be able to survive. Nevertheless, they still carried out their mission without hesitation. After all, they were Magford's personal guards. Their lord, Magford, had treated them well throughout their tenure. They had taken every good deed that Magford carried out to heart. Thus, now that their lord's territory was under threat, they would not hesitate, even though their enemy was a dragon. Moreover, many of them had come from the villages around the Moldos mountain range. Therefore, they were also very familiar with Boar Village. Even the soldiers who had never been to Boar Village knew that it was the village closest to the Lord's manor. They intuitively understood that, should Boar Village fall, the Lord's manor would most likely follow. The terrifying lightning beam that Max had unleashed earlier had instilled fear deep within their souls. There was also the dragon roar that had come from Max. Despite not being at the epicenter of the roar, many of the poultry within the Lord's manor had still been shaken to death by the roar. Should such a terrifying dragon reach the Lord's manor, the consequences would be unimaginably disastrous. Their spines could not help but feel a chill upon envisioning the enemy they were up against. Nevertheless, they were willing to sacrifice their lives so long as there was a chance of protecting their loved ones. Boar Village is right ahead. After an unknown amount of time, one of the guards at the head of the formation suddenly shouted. Upon hearing those words, a chill ran down the guards' spines. They were about to approach the dragon and engage in battle. At this moment, many people pulled out their swords from their waists and prepared themselves to launch an attack at any time. Magford frowned. The head of the unit beside him suddenly shouted. All teams, report the situation. Squad 1 is ready. Squad 2 is ready. Squad 3 is ready. The mage squad is ready. The captains of countless squads also shouted. The army formed by hundreds of guards burst out with an invincible aura. Very good, all squads, listen up. The leader of the army shouted and then looked at Duke Magford Bellagroya. Move out. Magford roared. All units move out. Upon giving the order, the guards who were already traveling at top speed suddenly went even faster. Malmo was also affected by the atmosphere. His veins were filled with adrenaline, and he wanted nothing more than to return to Boar Village. Boar Village was right in front of him. Back in Boar Village. After the death of the old village chief, many people had gathered around the spot where the old village chief had been incinerated. He was struck by Max's terrifying electricity, and not a single strand of hair nor scrap of clothing remained. The people who stopped at the place where the old village chief had died consisted of both old and young. It seemed that although the old village chief had a bad temper, he was still considered a respected village chief. How pitiful. He didn't do anything wrong, and yet he was killed just to prove a point. I hope the old village chief can go to heaven. The old village chief sacrificed himself to protect our village. He is a hero. The villagers wept and wept as they discussed. There were even quite a number of people who placed fresh flowers on the spot where the old village chief had died on. There was nothing they could do. Nothing had remained of the old village chief, after all. They could not build him a grave even if they wanted to. At this moment, the sound of hooves suddenly came from afar. What's going on? It's an army. Malmo must have already told the Lord about this matter. The Lord has sent an army to help us. Great, we're saved. At this moment, Aussie was the only person who was frowning. He knew how powerful Max was, and he was certain that an ordinary army would not stand a chance against him. Unless the Lord of the region had requested the old king to send over a dragon-vanquishing ballista, there was no chance they could land a critical blow onto Max. While these thoughts were running through Aussie's mind, the army had already entered Boar Village. What's going on? Wasn't there a dragon here? Why didn't anything happen? Didn't a huge energy beam explode here just now? The hundreds of guards were stunned when they realized that Boar Village was fine. Even though some of the houses had collapsed and there were cracks on their walls, none of the villagers seemed to have suffered any harm. The scene of carnage they had envisioned did not end coming true. They exchanged puzzled glances at each other. What exactly happened here? Magford slowly got down his horse and asked the villagers of Boar Village. Duke. This is what happened. An old woman walked up and said while crying. After that, she told him everything that Max had done. Magford nodded, and through the words of the old woman, he gradually understood everything. The red dragon was capable of speaking the human tongue. However, after robbing the village of its food and killing the village chief, it left. On the other hand, Malmo's eyes turned red with fury, and the veins in his neck bulged as he listened to the old woman's narration. He clenched his fists tightly, and as a result of his nails digging into his flesh, blood started to flow out. This damned red dragon killed my father. Malmo's eyes were bloodshot. The whites of his eyes were bloodshot, and the veins on his neck were bulging. He clenched his fists tightly, and his nails dug into his flesh, causing blood to flow out. This damned red dragon killed my father. At this moment, there were people who wanted to come out and persuade Malmo, but when the words were about to reach their mouths, they choked. Malmo's face was ferocious. Although his father had treated him badly, when he heard the news of his father's death, Malmo still lost control. He constantly slammed his fists into the ground. He could not care less about the blood flowing out of his hands. The only thoughts in his mind was that of revenge. Aside from that, he wanted nothing else. Mr. Aussie. Malmo suddenly turned his head and looked at Aussie of the Cockador's family. His voice was slightly trembling. What? Aussie frowned and asked in confusion. Please give me strength. I want to kill that red dragon. I want to kill it, no matter what it takes. Malmo gritted his teeth. His body was trembling with rage as he spoke. Aussie could see that Malmo had completely lost his reasoning. You still have a family, you still have a wife. Are you abandoning them all just because to avenge your father? Aussie snorted coldly. Aussie considered Malmo to be a complete fool. Irrational idiots like him would be the first to die when faced with danger. I understand. Both my children haven't grown up yet, and my wife needs my company, but I can't control this anger welling inside me. I feel that raging ball of flame within me that can't be extinguished unless I avenge my dead father. Unless I do so, I'm afraid that my body will be consumed by this raging flame inside of me. Malmo shouted angrily. The surrounding villagers of Boar village looked at Malmo worriedly. Their eyes were filled with pity as they observed Malmo's despair. In their eyes, Malmo had lost his mind because of his father's death. Oh my God, Malmo is really too pitiful. Yeah, although the old village chief has always treated Malmo poorly, it seems that Malmo really loves his father. With such a filial child, I'm certain that the village chief will be able to rest in peace in the afterlife. I hope that the old village chief will be reincarnated into a world without dragons in his next life. The people around whispered. At this moment, however, Aussie's pupils suddenly shrank. He seemed to have sensed something. He suddenly took a step forward and grabbed Malmo's shoulder. Then, he glared fiercely into Malmo's eyes. Mr. Aussie. I will only say this once. Even if you are a member of the Cockador's family, your status means nothing to me at this moment. Please stay away from me. Malmo had practically roared at Aussie. He wanted to break free from Aussie's restraint, but he could not do so. Aussie's strength was so great that even a huge rock weighing a few hundred kilograms was nothing in his eyes, let alone Malmo, who was just an ordinary person. Aussie seemed to have understood everything he wanted to see at this moment, and he slowly let go of his hands. Very interesting. I didn't expect you to spawn the seed of the devil as a result of your extreme anger. Aussie spoke in a language that none of the villagers could understand. Malmo was also confused, albeit for a different reason. He did not know what was the seed of the devil that Aussie was talking about. Of course, at this moment, Malmo had no intention of learning what it was. The desire to avenge his father was deeply rooted in his body. The only way to extinguish the raging flames within his heart was to kill Max with his own hands. Unless he did so, Malmo would probably collapse under the torture of the raging flames within his body. Most people were oblivious to the changes taking place in Malmo's body. The white snow around Malmo was melting away at a rapid pace. Only a few people had observed this phenomenon, but they had all chalked it up to be a coincidence. However, Aussie did not share the same sentiments. He knew how terrifying a person who had spawned a seed of devil was. Even though Malmo was already 40 years old and had spent half of his life as a normal person. Aussie looked at Malmo indifferently and said slowly, Malmo, do you want to take revenge for your father? Upon hearing the word revenge, Malmo immediately snapped his head around and looked at Aussie. Mr. Aussie, can you help me take revenge? Malmo gritted his teeth and asked. Before the village chief's demise, Malmo would have never spoken to the head of the Cockador's family in such a manner. Even the old village chief himself had never done so when he was still alive. I didn't have the ability to do so until a moment ago, but yeah, I do now. Aussie's expression was incomprehensible. But if you want revenge, you'll have to pay a huge price. This price is something you'll eventually come to regret. Even so, do you still want revenge? Aussie's words was like sweet nectar to Malmo's ears. Malmo nodded vigorously. Aussie smiled, and there was a sinister aura to it. He said to Malmo lightly, "In that case, come to my household tomorrow night. I will let you take revenge, and I will also let you experience extreme despair." Following this, Aussie then stood up and walked into the distance. The crowd very consciously opened a path for Aussie. As the person in charge of Cacador's family, they dared not obstruct his path. Only after Aussie had completely disappeared from their sight did they look at Malmo in shock. What was so great about Malmo? To think that he had gained the recognition of Aussie. They racked their brains but they could not come up with an answer. Was it because Malmo had lost his father? This was all too confusing for them. It had left everyone, including Malmo himself, in great confusion. The next evening, Malmo arrived at Aussie's home as scheduled. Aussie was part of the Cacador's family, and their abode was located in the deepest part of Boar village. In order to reach the Cacador's family's home, one would have to go through a dense layer of woods to reach it. This was intentional. After all, the Cacadors were a proud bunch and thus, they wanted as little contact as possible with the other villagers of Boar village. Malmo passed through a patch of thorns and looked at a pitch-black ancient mansion not far away. The mansion belonged to the Cacador's clan. Initially, Malmo was rather surprised by the mansion's appearance. Speaking of which, this was his first time seeing the Cacador's abode. Back when his father was in power, he had always prohibited himself and any other villager from stepping foot into the Cacador's territory. Although on the surface, the Cacador's family was a part of Boar village, in reality, they operated more like an independent region. Other than the old village chief, everyone else had treated the Cacador's residence as a forbidden zone. Even if they were to head out, the villagers of Boar village would keep a tight lip regarding the Cacador's bloodline to any outsiders they meet. Crack. Entranced by the Cacador's majestic mansion, Malmo did not notice that he had stepped upon a withered branch. The crisp sound had shattered the eerie silence surrounding the courtyard. In the next moment, a cold and deadly glint flashed past Malmo. It was extremely fast. It had happened in an instant, and it had almost struck Malmo at his neck. Had it actually struck him, Malmo, who was but an ordinary person, would undoubtedly die on the spot. That incomparably cold glint Malmo witnessed made him shudder in his boots. He dared not turn his head, even though he was well aware that there was someone right behind him. "Who are you?" A young voice came from behind Malmo. Malmo hesitated for a moment before deciding to turn around to face the person behind him. It was a young man in his early 20s. He still looked green around the edges. At this moment, this young man held up a gleaming blade and held it against Malmo's neck. Should the young man apply even the slightest pressure upon the blade, Malmo would undoubtedly start bleeding. "I'm following Mr. Aussie's orders. He told me to come here tonight." Once the realization had dawned upon him, the young man hurriedly returned his sword back to his scabbard that was hanging around his waist. "So you're the person father was referring to?" The young man's words had made known his relationship to Aussie. He was actually Aussie's son. Malmo was a little surprised. As expected, heroes were raised since young. Although my child is around this young man's age, be it in terms of combat ability or behavior, my child loses on all fronts. "Mr. Aussie told you about me?" Malmo quickly asked. The young man nodded. "He did. He said that you were a fool who had lost his mind for the sake of revenge." Upon hearing Aussie's evaluation of him, Malmo's lips curled into a bitter smile. However, Aussie was not mistaken. Even Malmo himself was aware of this, despite knowing how reckless he was acting. Dragons were fearsome creatures. They held power, immense power. How could he, a plebeian who did not possess any mana, hope to go against the red dragon that had killed his father? More likely than not, he did not even register as a threat in the dragon's eyes. Despite this, Malmo wanted to exact revenge on Max, regardless of the price he had to pay. Even Malmo was surprised. It was only after his father's death that Malmo realized how much his father meant to him, regardless of how poorly he had been treated. Thus, whenever Malmo recalled the loss of his father, he would subconsciously clench his fists in a sudden bout of anger. "Follow me. Father told me to bring you to him." The young man's expression was very indifferent. Although he understood the Malmo's plight, he did not seem sympathetic in the slightest. The young man turned around and walked towards the mansion. Malmo hurriedly followed. The light reflected upon the moon had shone on a small puddle, and it had revealed Malmo's current appearance to himself. He was in a sorry state, and his hair was a rat's nest. He looked haggard and slovenly. "If I were to be thrown to a random corner of the street, I would probably be mistaken as a beggar, wouldn't I?" Malmo chuckled bitterly. After taking one last glance at his appearance, Malmo shook his head helplessly and carried onward. He made up his mind and followed after the young man towards the direction of the mansion. Malmo was unsure whether he was overthinking it, but the air around the Kakadori's mansion felt different from the air in Boar village. Although he could not put a finger on what exactly felt off, it filled Malmo's fatigued body with a sense of relaxation he had not felt in a long time. It was as if all the pores on his body had opened up, and they were greedily gobbling in the air around him. Malmo subconsciously closed his eyes and immersed himself in the strange sensation. The young man who was leading Malmo seemed to have also sensed that something was wrong with Malmo. He turned his head to look at Malmo, only to find that Malmo had stopped in the courtyard. His eyes were closed and his hands slowly opened, as if he wanted to bathe in the moonlight. Completely unbeknownst to Malmo, countless elemental spirits were rapidly gathering around him. At this moment, Malmo was like a bright lamp in the dark night. Mana was converging around him. However, this was only gathering phase. Although Malmo could gather mana, he did not know how to absorb it into his body, nor did he know how to control it. As a result, the elementals slowly dissipated. It seems that father is right. This guy named Malmo indeed has the ability to sense mana. It's a pity that he's too old. Had he realized his talent earlier, perhaps he would have already become a platinum rank mage. The young man muttered to himself when he saw Malmo's expression. He did not disturb Malmo and watched from the sidelines. After an unknown period of time, Malmo slowly opened his eyes. The moon was hanging high in the sky, and it was scattering a faint layer of moonlight over the earth. Malmo was somewhat surprised. He hurriedly asked the youth beside him. "What's wrong with me? How long has it been?" The young man shrugged. "What a shame. Had you remained in that state for a bit longer, you might have reached the peak of your potential." Following this, the young man continued walking back to the mansion. Malmo was confused by the words of the young man. He scratched his head in confusion. What potential? What was he going on about? Malmo dared not ponder any longer and hurriedly followed the young man. The door to the mansion was massive, and it towered about 2 to 3 meters tall. The gate was made of fine steel, and there were all kinds of complicated patterns engraved on it. At first glance, it seemed to be telling the tale of the family to outsiders. The door slowly swung open, but all it revealed was a pitch-black darkness. Beside the massive door stood 2 stone statues. One was a man. He was naked, and there were veins popping out all across his body. He seemed to embody great strength. The other was a woman. Her graceful body was wreathed in leaves, and there was some sort of substance within her hands. While Malmo was busy staring at the sculptures, the young man proceeded into the mansion. Malmo quickly followed. However, his thoughts still lingered on the 2 sculptures. He felt that there were secrets hidden within them. However, as he was on the cusp of gaining power to defeat dragons, he needed to put behind those thoughts momentarily. Upon stepping foot into the mansion, the door behind him immediately slammed shut. A booming bang rang out, and it had given Malmo quite a jump. The surrounding lights suddenly lit up following this. The lights revealed an extremely luxurious interior to Malmo. "Let's go, father is still waiting for us." The young man glanced at Malmo and urged. Okay, okay. Malmo trotted to the young man's side. The mansion was massive, and the two of them walked for several minutes before reaching a grayish-black door. The door was unlike the luxurious decorations that surrounded the interior. It seemed to have existed for much longer, and there were several snake-like engravings carved across it. A sinister aura seemed to linger upon it. The young man stopped before the door and turned around to look at Malmo. Father is inside. You can enter. Oh, okay. Malmo nodded. After taking a deep breath, he then pushed the door open and entered. He was not worried of what Aussie would think of him. After all, he was poor. Although he possessed some weapons to hunt and fill his family's bellies, he had nothing else of value to his name. Bluntly put, Malmo had lived a poor life, and he did not possess anything of value. If Aussie wanted to rob someone, Malmo was definitely not his target. If Aussie wanted to kill Malmo, he would not have waited until now. After all, with the strength he possessed, Aussie could have killed Malmo any time he wanted. Going to such great lengths just to kill an insignificant speck of dust like Malmo would be a waste of Aussie's time. As such, rather than fearful, Malmo was instead curious as to why a commoner like himself would suddenly gain Aussie's favor. Creak. The door seemed to be a little rusty. Malmo had to put in quite a bit of muscle to push open the grayish-black iron door. The moment the iron door was pushed open, an unpleasant and ear-piercing creak was immediately heard. The room was not as bright as the corridor outside. A few oil lamps with magic imprints engraved on them hung on the wall. The flames within them emitted a faint glow. The room looked extremely strange to Malmo. Rather than being a secret room, it looked more like a religious site. Not just any religious site, however, as it looked more like a cult than anything else. Malmo subconsciously gulped. Had he been the Malmo from before, he would have already taken a step back and given up. However, that Malmo was long gone. The current Malmo was merely a vessel for exacting revenge on the dragon that killed his father. In the middle of the room was a familiar-looking middle-aged man. He was dressed in black, and he had his hands behind his back. He was none other than Aussie Cockadors. He was the head of the Cockadors family, and he was the person Malmo wanted to meet. Oh ho, it seems that you're not spineless. Though the anger burning within you might be instilling you with courage. Aussie was surprised when he saw Malmo entering the room without showing any signs of fear. I want revenge, Mr. Aussie. Malmo frowned and clenched his fists. I came as promised. Please grant me the power to take revenge on the Red Dragon. Malmo shouted. His voice was thunderous and powerful, and it did not contain a single shred of hesitation. Aussie nodded. Calm down. I promised you, didn't I? Though I must say, your display earlier was rather surprising. I didn't expect someone with this level of affinity for magic to exist within Boar Village. Had you received the proper education when you were young, your strength might rival even mine. Aussie said with some regret. He was speaking the truth. He did not expect Malmo to possess such great talent in magic. However, as a result of the passage of time, what could have been a genius mage who possessed enough power to shake the Moldos Mountains had remained no more than an ordinary person. Had Aussie or the previous family head discovered Malmo's talent earlier and properly groomed him, the Cockadors family would have gained a powerful mage within their ranks. OSS wiped away the distracting thoughts in his heart and said calmly to Malmo in front of him. Malmo, do you believe in the devil? Aussie's question was rather abrupt. Malmo was caught off guard by it. The devil? Noticing Malmo's confused expression, Aussie continued. I'm not talking about the kind of devil that parents would teach their young about. I'm not talking about the devil that will be waiting for you in hell. Rather, I'm talking about the supernatural creature that wanders our world. Do you believe in the existence of this devil? Malmo did not understand what Aussie was trying to express, but he followed his gut and shook his head slowly. As far as he was concerned, angels and the devil were fictional beings that existed only in folklore or holy scriptures. These scriptures could not be any more detached from the harsh reality of the world. How could Malmo believe the existence of such things? Oz seemed to have expected Malmo's reaction, and did not think too much about it. He continued speaking to Malmo. Since you do not believe in his existence, I believe the first step is to make you believe in his existence. Aussie took out a small knife from his sleeve, and gently cut his wrist. Slash. Fresh blood immediately flowed out from Aussie's wrist. Mr. Aussie, what are you doing? Shut up and watch carefully. Aussie told Malmo to shut up. More and more blood flowed out from Aussie's wrist, to the point that Aussie's blood was flowing everywhere on the ground. It was a shocking scene. However, what struck out as weird was that Aussie's expression remained unchanged despite all the blood he had lost. His expression did not change in the slightest. Suddenly, the blood that was scattered across the ground began to boil. It gradually formed the shape of a skeleton. The blood-red skeleton levitated in the air, and approached Malmo. Are you the person Aussie mentioned? The skeleton spoke the human tongue seemingly out of nowhere. This gave Malmo a big fright. Malmo, who had been maintaining a calm expression throughout the entire process, suddenly widened his mouth in shock. Mr. Aussie. Malmo subconsciously turned to Aussie, but Aussie merely shook his head and remained silent. Let's see whether you're worthy of my power. The skeleton disregarded Malmo's words, and it immediately rushed into Malmo's body. Swoosh! The moment the bloody skeleton entered Malmo's body, Malmo suddenly felt that his body was no longer his. His soul had detached from his body, and he was staring at his body in midair. It was at this moment that his body suddenly began to tremble. Malmo's eyes had turned completely black. Interesting. Very interesting. Aussie, no wonder you said that this kid would satisfy me. I didn't expect him to spawn a devil seed all by himself. This makes it much easier for me to operate. The skeleton from earlier was using Malmo's mouth to speak. Malmo's soul was overwhelmed with terror. He finally understood the devil that Aussie was referring to earlier. In the next moment, countless pitch-black threads began to spread out from Malmo's heart. These threads were as thin as a strand of hair, but they possessed a frightening aura. Soon, the black threads covered Malmo's entire body. Once the last thread had covered Malmo's body, his entire body was already entirely black. However, the black appearance did not last for long. After a few minutes, Malmo returned to his original appearance. Upon regaining his body, Malmo shuddered. He crumpled onto the ground with fear lingering within his eyes. What happened to me? Mr. Aussie. The blood on the ground had already dried up, and the bloody skeleton was nowhere to be seen. Aussie remained silent. He suddenly walked forward and punched Malmo's lower abdomen with his right hand. An audible whoosh could be heard. The air had been compressed by his punch. A powerful gust of wind was accompanied by this punch. Bam! A shockwave rippled out from the spot where Malmo was standing at. The power of Aussie's punch was definitely not small. Malmo was completely unprepared for Aussie's sudden attack. He did not even put up his hands. At this moment, his eyes bulged out. Malmo's body was sent hurtling by Aussie's punch. Like a piece of trash, he fell far into the corner. After a long while, Malmo finally managed to regain his footing. He wanted to say something, but he suddenly vomited. Aussie looked indifferently at the miserable Malmo. He placed his hands behind his back and merely observed. After a dozen or so minutes, Malmo finally stood back up with great difficulty and confronted Aussie. Mr. Aussie. What are you doing? Malmo did not understand why Aussie would suddenly punch him. As expected of the Cockador's family, the power behind his punch is terrifying. Malmo mentally noted. Aussie's eyes lit up at this moment. Come with me. Aussie did not explain too much as he brought the extremely weak Malmo out of the room. After passing through the long corridor, they arrived at another room. This room was much more normal than the previous strange room. It looked like a training ground. Aussie slowly raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. Immediately after, a huge rock appeared in the room. The rock was like a small mountain, and it was at least 4 meters tall. Malmo looked at the huge rock that suddenly appeared in shock. However, seeing as Aussie was maintaining a tight lip, Malmo decided not to ask. Aussie walked forward and slowly clenched his right hand into the shape of a fist. The next second, boom! Aussie launched his fist forward. The huge rock immediately shattered, and debris flew everywhere. Malmo could not help but widen his mouth at the display of strength. Wait, did Aussie use the same strength to punch me earlier? A strange thought appeared in Malmo's mind. Mr. Aussie, did you use the same strength to punch me earlier? Unable to suppress the excitement in his heart, Malmo hurriedly asked. Aussie nodded and grabbed a white towel from the side to wipe his hands. Not exactly. I've only used half of the strength that I applied on you to shatter this rock. You should realize how your body has changed, right? Aussie looked at Malmo. Malmo was initially very excited, but in the next second, he suddenly looked down at his hands. Wait. I don't recall that skeleton leaving my body. Mr. Aussie, that skeleton. I suggest you to call him the devil. Aussie said faintly. Your hatred for the dragon has given birth to a devil seed. Should you die while this devil seed exists within you, there is a high likelihood that your corpse will morph into a devil-like existence. Now that you have been possessed by a devil, this will be both a benefit and a disadvantage. You can already feel it, can't you? You have a physique 100 times stronger than before, and you have gained great strength. Moreover, if you wish to do so, you can even use the power of the devil to unleash all sorts of spells and familiars. Aussie paused at this point. Of course, all of this comes at a price. Counting from this point onwards, you only have 10 years left to live. Moreover, whenever you use the power of the devil, this duration will shorten. When you fully unleash the power of the devil, or once your life force has exhausted, the devil within you will take over your body and become its new master. Aussie's explanation made Malmo shudder. He looked at his hands. A skull with blood-colored threads could be seen engraved within his hands. The skull exuded a sinister aura. Malmo looked up at Aussie with great terror. Mr. Aussie, how can I use the power of the devil? Communicate with the devil, for he is now your servant. However, once your life has run its course, your roles will be swapped. Aussie responded. Malmo closed his eyes slowly. In the next moment, he sensed that there was another presence in his mind aside from himself. It's probably the skeleton that entered my body earlier. Devil, I seek revenge. TSK, TSK, TSK. I have already gone through your memories, and I'm aware of your desires. Needless to say, you are truly a fool. However, it doesn't matter to me. After all, I'll be obtaining your body sooner or later anyway. If you're a fool, then all the better. The Crimson Skeleton's voice rang out within Malmo's mind. Shut your mouth. Mr. Aussie said that you are my slave until I die. Malmo said angrily. Indeed, Aussie is right. You can order me to do anything for you, even if it's to kill a dragon. So long as you have enough life force to exchange for the favor. The blood-red skeleton said sinisterly. The door of the room was pushed open. It was Aussie's son who had heard the big commotion and came to see the situation. Once he saw Malmo, his pupils shrank. His sharp senses told him that Malmo's body had undergone an earth-shattering change. Hercules, go and fight Malmo. Aussie saw his son coming and said calmly. Hercules Cockadors. This was the name of the young man. As you wish, father. Hercules walked to the center of the field, pulled out his sword, and pointed it at Malmo. Malmo gulped. His combat experience had constituted of only fighting wild boars. He was not particularly skilled in fighting against another person. Moreover, his opponent was the future successor of the Cacador's family, Hercules, Aussie's biological child, who was far stronger than most humans. Can I really beat Hercules with the devil's strength? Malmo took a deep breath. He did not plan to ask Aussie for any weapons. He doubted that the hunting rifle that he used would deal any substantial damage to Hercules. Malmo clenched his hands tightly and shouted, "Come at me." At the next moment, Hercules' figure had already vanished from sight. A great sense of danger suddenly struck Malmo. At this time, Malmo did not realize that a fine black thread had actually appeared on the back of his neck. The thread was like an eye that transmitted the vision behind Malmo's back into Malmo's mind. He had spotted Hercules, who was staring down at his neck. He could actually see behind himself. Malmo's heart thumped, and he quickly crouched down to dodge Hercules' strike. Hercules' brows raised at this sight. He immediately gave up on using sneak attacks. With a light tap of his feet, he then launched forward while slashing at Malmo with his sword. A vertical slash. The angle of the attack was extremely masterful. Malmo, who had just exerted his strength, could not possibly dodge this strike. He was going to be injured. Malmo was shocked. However, at this moment, a cold laugh came from Malmo's mind. "Malmo, do you actually think that such a gentle tap is capable of hurting us? Watch carefully. This is how you use a devil's power." The voice in his mind disappeared. In the next moment, Malmo subconsciously raised his hands to shield himself. The red skull in his palms suddenly burst out with powerful energy. Black threads wrapped around Malmo's hands as he took on Hercules' slash. Clang! The sound of metal colliding suddenly resounded throughout the room. Malmo could even feel the sparks produced by the interweaving of his hands and the sword. His hands that were wrapped in the black threads possessed great defensive power. Upon realizing his new defensive capabilities, Malmo's heart was filled with a sense of power. "I've become stronger. I have a strength that others cannot even fathom. I now have the strength to take revenge." The power that Malmo had obtained from the devil had given Malmo feel a strong sense of fulfillment. Malmo opened his eyes slowly, his original cowardice now nowhere to be found. The current Malmo only had an unrivaled confidence in his eyes. "Kakik. I'm sure this level of strength won't be sufficient for you. Should you wish to obtain more power, feel free to come look for me." The voice from the crimson skeleton within his mind slowly faded away. Malmo inspected the condition of his body. As far as he was concerned, the black threads had not affected him in the slightest. In other words, using the threads would not put his lifespan at risk. Hercules frowned when he saw the change in Malmo. His eyes flashed with a glint of determination. "Father, can I get serious?" He turned to Aussie, who was watching the battle, and asked. "A lion uses its full strength even when hunting a rabbit. You shouldn't have held back since the beginning, Hercules," Aussie said coldly. Hercules frowned. Naturally, he could detect his father's disapproval over him not using his full strength. However, never in his wildest dream would he have expected Malmo to undergo such a huge change. No wonder father chose him to inherit the devil. With this thought in mind, Hercules lifted his chin slightly. A cold luster appeared on the blade of the sword in his hand. Buzz! The blade shook. An incomparably sharp sword aura burst forth from the blade. Malmo lunged forward. Instead of defending passively, he was now taking an aggressive stance. After his body's modification, Malmo had become much faster than before. In less than 3 seconds, Malmo had already closed the distance between him and Hercules. Hercules placed his left index and left middle finger on the blade while muttering to himself. His eyes were closed throughout this entire process. Malmo frowned. There must be something fishy going on. What is Hercules trying to do? However, Malmo had no intention of holding back. After all, the enemy in front of him was Hercules. He possessed the bloodline of a hero, and he had been nurtured by Aussie since he was an infant. In the world of martial arts, speed was absolute. Malmo wrapped his right fist in black thread and launched it forward. In the blink of an eye, Malmo's right fist had turned completely black. A powerful evil aura suddenly burst forth from Malmo's hand. Everything happened in an instant. Just as Malmo's fist attack was about to arrive, Hercules suddenly opened his eyes. His seemingly skinny arm unleashed a terrifying power at this moment. Although Malmo's figure was already extremely close, Hercules was still able to pull off two moves. Horizontal slash. Vertical slash. It was his combined cross slash. The power of his combined cross slash was extremely powerful. It was capable of generating a sword aura across the blade of his sword. Hercules did not exert any mana. He had merely used his raw strength to produce the sword aura. Should news of this leak to the outside world, everyone would be extremely shocked. They would no doubt revere Hercules as a genius in swordsmanship. However, Malmo did not have such luxuries. Before he could even process what had happened, his fist had already collided with the slash. In the next moment, an extremely ear-piercing sound rang out within the arena. Then, a dull thud followed. It stirred up a lot of dust. Once the dust dispersed, Malmo's figure appeared on the spot. His chest rose and fell rhythmically, and his entire body was drenched in sweat. Not far away sat Hercules. It was not because Hercules had lost the battle of strength, however. It was simply because his body was incapable of withstanding the impact of their collision, whilst Malmo's abnormal physique had allowed him to absorb the impact. After slowly climbing up from the ground, Hercules placed his sword back into its sheath and walked towards Malmo. This was not a sign of defeat, however, nor was it an attempt of acknowledging Malmo's newfound strength. The battle was not over yet. Hercules' brows were closely knitted. He did not expect Malmo, who now possessed the power of a devil, to be this powerful. Even his own father had not possessed such a terrifying defensive ability. Hercules felt as if he was striking a diamond when he struck Malmo's fist earlier. Malmo did not budge a single inch. If he wanted to win this duel, he would have to use his ultimate move. In order to prove himself in front of his father, Hercules was willing to give it his all. Hercules' eyes became colder, and his steps became slower. However, the pressure he exerted on Malmo was getting stronger and stronger. In Malmo's perception, he could clearly feel that Hercules had already abandoned his defense. In order to pursue the ultimate attack, he did not hesitate to sacrifice his defensive ability. The power he was accumulating made Malmo break out in cold sweat. Just how powerful is his attack going to be? Malmo knew not the answer. The devil's voice rang out within his mind once more. His attack is not something you can withstand. Beg me for strength, and I shall grant it to you. Malmo snorted coldly as his hands turned completely black. He did not plan to rely on the power of the devil again. This was not a battle with the red dragon, he would rather not squander his life force. Aussie, who was watching at the side, saw Malmo's actions and was a little surprised. Malmo's actions indicated that he intended to take Hercules' attack head-on. Come at me. Malmo shouted coldly. Swing. Hercules suddenly pulled out his sword. The sound of a huge blade being unsheathed resounded throughout the surroundings. Malmo suddenly felt countless crystal-clear threads appearing in his line of sight. In the next moment, Malmo's pupils shrunk to the size of pinholes. These weren't just threads but countless terrifying blade auras. A total of 72 sword aura threads were coming at him. Die. Hercules said coldly. The next moment, blood splattered everywhere. Blood splattered everywhere. Malmo's body had been slashed by several sword auras. After all, how could Malmo possibly block all 72 of the strikes with only the threads that had enveloped his hands? Countless wounds instantly appeared on Malmo's body, and blood gushed out from them. It was a bloody scene. The ground, the walls, and even Hercules' face were all drenched in Malmo's blood. Malmo felt his strength rapidly draining from him. Suddenly his vision blurred, and he collapsed onto the ground. Thump. "Father, I won," Hercules said indifferently while looking at Malmo's body that had slumped over. "No, you haven't won yet. I won't recognize your victory until Malmo's dead." Aussie crossed his arms over his chest and responded indifferently. A hint of surprise flashed across Hercules' eyes. He did not understand why his father wanted him to kill Malmo. Didn't he obtain this power just to take revenge on a dragon? Why kill him here? Malmo, who was lying in a pool of blood, did not have the slightest ability to resist. However, seeing as it was a direct order from his father, Hercules dared not reject him. Once again, Hercules pulled out his gleaming sword from its sheath. Swish! He hesitantly tightened his grip over the weapon while his chest rose and fell rhythmically. This was Hercules' first time killing someone. Although he had killed several magical beasts in the Moldos mountain range at his father's request, he had never actually killed another human being before. However, his father's words were absolute. If it was Aussie's order to kill Malmo, Hercules would not hesitate. Swish! The edge of the blade flashed with a cold gleam. Unbeknownst to Hercules, however, his majestic sword, which was made out of mithril, had been chipped. Hercules slowly walked towards Malmo. His shoes were already soaked in Malmo's blood. Malmo's warm and sticky blood had made Hercules rather uncomfortable, so much so that his calm demeanor had been momentarily disrupted by the disgusting sensation. However, he quickly readjusted his emotions with a quick twitch of his eyebrows. He brought his arms up high while he gathered strength in his arms. "Go to hell, Malmo." Hercules let out a long breath and enunciated each word slowly. Hercules had finally put down his restraints and reservations. In this moment, Hercules' eyes were filled with killing intent. He was prepared to take Malmo's life. A mysterious aura surrounded Hercules. Although he had not used any mana, faint blue flames still appeared around him. It was killing intent. It was pure, unadulterated killing intent that had been condensed to the extreme. Hercules was indeed a prodigy. Despite his first time killing another human being, he was able to muster such intense killing intent. Even Aussie, who was watching from the side, had revealed a surprised expression at this sight. He did not expect that his son, who had always been an obedient child, to bear such powerful killing intent. It had rivaled his own. Hercules' killing intent had reached its peak, and his blue flames were now burning fiercely. Hercules' eyes suddenly narrowed, and he fiercely swung down his sword. Chop! There was no technique nor finesse involved within the strike. It was a simple, violent slash. Despite that, the speed at which he swung the blade had left an afterimage in its wake. Clang! However, the moment the sword struck Malmo's neck, a loud clang suddenly rang out. Upon closer inspection, Hercules noticed that Malmo's neck was fortified with several black threads. Malmo had intercepted Hercules' most powerful strike. Hercules could not help but narrow his eyes and subconsciously took a step back. With the defense that Malmo commanded, Hercules feared that the only way to harm him was to use magic. Did Malmo really faint? Hercules no longer hesitated. He lunged his sword at Malmo's heart this time. Fast, accurate, and ruthless. These three words could be used to describe Hercules' newest strike. Clang! Another familiar metallic sound rang out. Although the blade had already pierced through Malmo's clothes, it had failed to penetrate Malmo's skin once more. It's the black threads again. Damn it! Hercules was growing impatient. He took a deep breath, and rays of light suddenly rose from his hands. Mana fluctuations appeared all across Hercules' body. He was finally using his mana. The rays of light gathered on Hercules' palms, and as a result, the speed at which he waved his sword had increased by twofold. Even if Malmo was conscious, Hercules doubted that he would be able to read his movements. Wind spirits, heed my call. Grant me speed of 1,000 winds. Hercules chanted. Countless sword auras and sword silhouettes launched out from Hercules like a raging tide. Clang! 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 Countless metallic clangs rang out from Malmo's body. No matter where Hercules struck, a patch of black thread would appear to intercept his attack. The defensive capabilities of Malmo's black threads was starting to give Hercules a headache. They had intercepted his attacks time and time again, and even though Malmo had already lost consciousness, Hercules was unable to lay a single finger on Malmo. Hercules' terrifying barrage lasted for a full minute. Despite that, Malmo was completely unharmed during the entire minute. Hercules panted heavily. His chest was constantly heaving up and down, and his clothes were drenched in sweat. With the assistance of the wind spirits, Hercules had launched 4,217 attacks at Malmo, who had already lost consciousness and was incapable of resisting. That had equated to around 70 swings a second at Malmo. With such a high attack frequency, Hercules was confident that he could break down even the walls of Lord Magfred's manor, which had been enchanted by magic. Malmo's body was completely shrouded in thin black threads. Hercules no longer continued his attacks. He had already given it all, only to come up empty-handed. Do you realize it now, Hercules? This is the power of a devil, or rather, the power of unleashed by a devil seed after being possessed by a devil. Even though Malmo has yet to adapt to the devil's power, you are still unable to harm him. Once Malmo has completely integrated with the devil within him, he will evolve once again. Ossie's face, which had been indifferent throughout the entire battle, suddenly revealed a smile. Are you making fun of me, father? Hercules frowned and looked at Ossie. Ossie shook his head. How can that be? You are my son. You realize how powerful Malmo is, don't you? Once you devour him, you will be able to wield his strength without the same drawbacks. Once that happens, our family will finally break free from the kingdom's shackles. We will no longer be the puppets of the kingdom. We will take back what rightfully belongs to us. Ossie looked at Malmo, who was still unconscious, and said with a smile. Due to the old king's orders, the Cacador's family had been stationed in the northernmost part of the continent. They were stationed in the Moldos mountain range under the pretense that they were to guard the kingdom against the silver dragons that lived within the mountains. However, the silver dragons adored humans, and would even voluntarily help them out. Why would they attack the kingdom? Clearly, it was a ruse by the old king. His true goal was to banish the heroic families that had accomplished great feats to the wilderness, so that they would pose no threat to the old king's reign. It was the wish of many of Ossie's elders to return to their ancestral land. However, this request had been shot down by the old king time and time again, even after the elders had died, and they had only wished to be buried in their ancestral grounds. After all, the old king, Alfred, had long taken a fancy to the ancestral land of the Cacador's family, and he had even transformed their land into an amusement park for his youngest daughter, Princess Tess. However, Ossie was not as subservient as his elders. He refused to allow the old king to act wantonly any longer. Upon realizing that Malmo possessed a devil seed, Ossie immediately put his plan into motion. Once Hercules had consumed Malmo, he would be able to use the power of the devil without suffering any drawbacks. Should that happen, the Cacador's family will finally be able to rule over the continent. As for the old king, Alfred, Ossie would make him pay a heavy price for his selfish and greedy desires. Malmo slowly raised his head from the ground. Only 3 minutes had gone by since he fainted. He slowly stood up, and he looked somewhat disheveled. Hercules had already disappeared. Ossie had found a chair somewhere, and was sitting on it as he waited for Malmo to regain consciousness. It seems that as a result of your duel, you have mastered a portion of the devil's power. Although your mastery is still incomplete, I believe that you're now capable of going against the dragon, albeit only defensively. Ossie said calmly. Malmo was a little excited. Do I really have the power to go against a dragon? I said, only defensively. You'll survive the terrifying lightning that it can unleash, and you can even take on its claws head-on. However, as you are now, you won't be able to pierce through the dragon's tough scales. I'm sure that you're aware that a dragon's scales is its greatest defensive asset. Head to the armory later, and pick out a weapon to your liking. From today onwards until you personally end the dragon's life, you'll remain in my home and receive my training. Following this, Aussie stood up and left the room. Malmo hurriedly followed. The two of them walked in the corridor for a while until Malmo suddenly asked, "Mr. Aussie, are there no servants in the manor?" Aussie placed his hands behind his back and turned around to glance at Malmo. "Why? Are you volunteering to be one?" Malmo waved his hand. "Your mansion is so big and despite that it's spotless. I thought there would be many servants in charge of cleaning the mansion. After all, my father also said that besides him, no one else is allowed to go near your mansion." Aussie sneered. "Servants? Well, we do have them, I suppose." Aussie snapped his fingers, and the lights in the mansion suddenly turned scarlet. Immediately after, several scarlet figures appeared on the ground. The moment they appeared, they immediately began cleaning the mansion. Malmo was stunned. These figures were somewhat similar to the blood-red skeleton that had entered his body earlier. Could they be devils too? Seemingly having read Malmo's thoughts, Aussie nodded and explained. "You're right. I'm also someone who possesses the power of a devil. As for what power it is, you're not qualified to know that yet. Perhaps you'll learn of it once you're actually capable of harming me." Aussie shrugged and added. "Also, your father is right. Other than the people I've given permission to enter, anyone who tries to enter my residence will be attacked by them. Your father did not stop you from disturbing us due to our family's reputation. No, he was only doing it to protect your lives." Malmo clenched his fists and his eyes turned red. The snowy Moldos Mountains were a vast expanse of whiteness. Max's figure seemed small, tiny even within the huge mountain range. He was not fast by any means, but every step he took was extremely steady. If you were wondering why Max was not flying, it was due to the heavy snowstorm surrounding the mountains. As a result of the storm, Max would need to exert 10 times the strength just to fly in the direction he wanted. Worse still, however, Max would easily get lost in a snowstorm while in flight. Although he had the systems mapped to assist him, the time he required to locate the snow lotus would be greatly extended. Although he had plenty of time to spare, Max chose the most reliable method. Along the way, should Max feel hungry, he would hunt the surrounding beasts, and if he were thirsty, he would consume the snow. Thanks to his strong physique, Max did not feel any discomfort from the environment. Moreover, after consuming the Dragonkin's power, Max had experienced explosive growth. Although it had been less than a year since Max was born, Max's appearance was already close to that of an adult. At this rate, perhaps in just a few more years, Max would obtain an adult body. Grumble. The sound of protest came from Max's stomach. Max had not eaten anything for 2 days. Thanks to the barren state of the Moldos mountain range, what little animals and magical creatures that remained could easily detect Max's presence from a mile away, giving them ample time to get away from him. At this point, Max was considering postponing his plans to locate the dark snow lotus crystal until he had eaten. However, upon crossing a snowy mountain, Max was stunned by what he saw. To his surprise, he had found traces of humans setting up camp at the peak of the mountain. However, this was by no means an ordinary camp, as Max had detected a familiar smell coming from it. It was the smell of another dragon. It was a familiar scent, yet unfamiliar at the same time. Max slowly closed his eyes and searched his ancestors' memories for the owner of such a scent. However, Max was still too young, and his memories had yet to be fully awakened. This gave Max quite a headache. He could almost make out what creature this scent had belonged to, and yet, try as he might, he just could not recall it. This smell is both familiar and unfamiliar. Could it be from a subspecies of red dragons? Max thought to himself. After all, the dragons that Max had encountered so far were black dragons, red dragons, as well as a Dragonkin that possessed the strength of an immemorial dragon. Aside from that, there were also his half-siblings that Agatha had tossed out of the lair back when he was born. Those that feel familiar should probably be subspecies like my half-siblings, right? After all, Max did not feel any sense of familiarity with the black dragon or dragonkin he had encountered. At the next moment, Max's huge figure stopped. He was stunned by what he saw when he peered ahead. It had taken him a long while to return to his senses. He had spotted the skeleton of a dragon. Max was certain that it had belonged to a red dragon back when it was alive. Max slowly walked forward and looked at the skeleton of the dragon. The dragon had not been dead for long. Based on Max's estimates, it had only been 20 to 30 years since its passing. Max spotted something akin to a finger bone within the dragon skeleton's mouth. The unfamiliar scent had come from said finger bone. Max frowned slightly as he observed this finger bone. It was likely that the finger bone had belonged to the killer of the red dragon. Despite killing a red dragon, it had only cost said owner a single finger. Just what kind of existence was it? How could it defeat a red dragon with only the loss of a single finger? Max continued to inspect the skeleton. After comparing its physique with the memories of his ancestors, Max concluded that the red dragon had been defeated while it was still in its prime. It had died around the age of 500. Red dragons of this age should possess strong fighting abilities. However, through the red dragon's skeleton, Max realized that the red dragon had been brutally defeated. It was completely no match against its opponent. Its opponent's methods were very vicious. Who did this? Max did not understand. Although he was not enraged over the red dragon's death, he was rather concerned about the potential threat. After all, the enemy of the red dragon might still be living within the area. Should Max put down his guard at this moment, he might get jumped at and killed. Max looked around vigilantly. He inspected every nook and cranny, and made sure he had not missed anything. At this moment, the sound of rushing wind could be heard coming from the distance. An extremely fast object was heading straight towards Max. The other party had discovered Max's presence and was coming at him. Based on its speed, Max was certain that it had meant him harm. It was most certainly hostile. Max did not open his eyes. His brows were tightly knit together as he tried to recall the enemy he was up against. The inherited memories of dragons would expand as they grew. Thus, it was rather difficult for the one-year-old Max to pry open the memories that had been sealed away. The distance between the two was rapidly closing. 2,000 meters. 1,000 meters. Although this might seem like a long distance, based on the speed of the approaching object, the two would most likely come into contact within seconds. While this was fine if the incoming entity possessed no ill intentions, Max doubted that it was the case. Finally, Max suddenly opened his eyes, and a cold glint appeared in his eyes. He slowly opened his huge mouth, and began condensing electricity within his mouth. Silver Dragon. Like a bolt of lightning, the incoming entity had appeared before Max in the blink of an eye. However, the existence before him looked nothing like the silver dragon that Max had in his mind. The silver dragon was not even 2 meters tall. Aside from that, she had a head of bright golden hair, and her skin was white and tender. She looked no different from an ordinary beautiful young lady. The young lady's appearance was extremely revealing. Aside from the crucial parts which were covered by silver scales, the majority of her pure white skin was left completely exposed. However, the eyes of the young lady, who possessed enough beauty to bring cities to ruin, were incomparably cold at this moment. A cluster of biting cold ice energy was gathering in her right hand, and she was ready to launch an attack. It's not a silver dragon. Max's eyes narrowed. The silver dragons within his ancestors' memories were nothing like the young lady before him. System, show me her stats. Having already turned into a red dragon, Max was completely unfazed by the appearance of the golden-haired young lady. On the contrary, alarms were blaring in Max's mind. His gut was warning him of great danger. Most importantly, he had detected a familiar scent coming from the young lady. It was similar to the scent of the finger bone contained within the red dragon's skeleton. She's of the same species as the owner of the finger bone. Ding dong. Showing its stats right now. True name, Avril Avinia Grace. Race, Silver Dragon, Lawful Good. Current dragon rank, Young. Age, 566. Maximum lifespan, 9,999, Archaic Dragon. Attack, 103, Normal Young Silver Dragon 15. Spell Strength, 511, Normal Young Silver Dragon 25. Defense, 99, Normal Young Silver Dragon 10. Speed, 130, Normal Young Red Dragon 13. Magic, Icicle Spell, Blizzard, Frost Seal, Freezing Bite. Abilities, Cloud Movement, Self-Transformation, Wind Walk, Wind Manipulation, Feather Fall, Weather Manipulation, Reverse Gravity, Leap. Breath, Ice, Paralyzing. Remarks, a stellar silver dragon. Although her strength cannot be compared to a certain someone who has cheats, she's still a formidable creature. A large string of data appeared in front of Max. Upon realizing that she possessed the self-transformation ability, everything finally made sense to Max. The memories of silver dragons that had been sealed away was finally unlocked. The silver dragons' appearance were dignified and elegant. They were also kind creatures that would gladly lend a helping hand. Moreover, whenever they made contact with humans, they would often take the forms of kind elderly people or pale-skinned blonde-haired young ladies. The silver dragons were also sometimes called the shield dragons, due to the silver plates on their heads. Aside from that, the silver dragon's pupils will also become lighter and lighter as they aged, and at some point, their eyes will take on a silvery shade, reminiscent of Mercury. The silver dragons were non-combative creatures, and they would not attack unless they were provoked or faced with evil entities. As such, it was no wonder that the red dragons were often targeted by the silver dragons. The red dragons and the silver dragons were mortal enemies. Whenever the two met, a river of blood would definitely ensue. Although Max could not figure out how the silver dragon had discovered him, he was certain that this blonde girl, this silver dragon harbored hostile intent towards him. A huge battle was about to break out. Max snapped, "Halt! I have no intention of fighting against you. I might have considered it if you were a human." The little mouth of the young lady had only opened slightly. However, the voice that came out was nothing short of deafening. Her small hand, which had been gathering mana throughout all this, was also launched at Max at this moment. Swoosh! The instant the ice energy left her hand, countless terrifying icicles, which were 20 to 30 meters long, formed in the air. With the assistance of a gale force wind, the young lady had launched all the icicles at Max. Realizing that the other party was not going to listen to reason, Max's expression darkened. Now that Max had absorbed the strength of 3 different entities via the battle of existence, Max was not the least bit afraid of his opponent's attack. He opened his mouth abruptly and countless lightning snakes as thick as an arm coiled around his fangs. Then, a terrifying thunderbolt exploded. Boom! Thunderous divine retribution. With Max as its center, the ground within a radius of 50 kilometers suddenly quaked. A heaven-defying aura enveloped the scene, followed by a terrifying thunderbolt. Its target was the frost energy unleashed by the young lady. The golden-haired lady's pupils suddenly shrank. She could tell that Max was strong, but even so, she was certain that he was still a dragon hatchling. No matter how strong its body was, she was certain that she could crush a mere dragon hatchling with a single dragon breath. However, the thunderous divine retribution that Max had unleashed earlier had subverted all of her expressions. It was not a spell that a dragon hatchling should be able to cast. Even if one possessed the aptitude of an ancient dragon at birth, it was impossible for one to comprehend this kind of magic at such a young age. After all, Avril was already 500 years old, and she had only just comprehended a spell equivalent to Max's in strength just recently. The frost energy that Avril had unleashed was no match for Max's terrifying thunder. It was instantly destroyed, and it had only served to weaken Max's thunderous divine retribution by 1%. She wanted to dodge Max's attack, but she soon discovered that the spell had been locked onto her. Even if she were to dodge it, it would immediately home back at her. Avril frowned, and a serious expression appeared on her exquisite face. She had underestimated Max's strength. Even if she wanted to unleash a spell that matched thunderous divine retributions in strength, it was already far too late. The terrifying beam of lightning was already right before her eyes. Damn it! Frost Seal! Avril clenched her teeth tightly. She brought her hands before herself and performed an extremely complicated hand gesture. Countless swirls of mana swiftly gathered before her. In the next moment, Max's terrifying beam of electricity smashed into it.